I just finished reading this book, Billion Dollar Loser, about the epic rise and spectacular fall of Adam Neumann and WeWork. Now, I am fascinated by these type of stories of insane company valuations that have no attachment to reality. And this one reads like the startup version of The Emperor Has No Clothes. So today I want to talk about what I learned, the takeaways, and I'll also share a personal story of a friend's co-working space that was put out of business by some crazy tactics WeWork used. I'm giving away a copy of this book at the end of this video, so stick around for your chance to get it. Now, in case you didn't know, WeWork is a global co-working real estate company that behaved and acted like a tech company for many years, in spite of the fact that for many years their IT department was run by a high school student from Queens.
It's real bad.
Now, during my time living in New York from 2011 to 2018, I saw WeWork rise from a single co-working spot to seemingly having offices all over the city. Now, WeWork was started by Adam Neumann, who's described as the tall, dark-haired, barefoot, meat-banning, weed-smoking, tequila-drinking, Kabbalah studying, experimental school opening, Paltrow cousin-in-law, Adam, and his architect co-founder Miguel McKelvey in a 50-50 partnership. Now, Adam was like the dreamer, the deal maker, while Miguel was the down-to-earth architect that felt like he tried to stay grounded and bring Adam's outrageous, ambitions to reality. In their operating agreement, this is just a funny aside, they had a clause that said if the co-founders couldn't agree on something, they would stay in a room with each other until the situation was resolved. Now, this seems extreme, and this clause is somehow better and worse than my own operating agreement with my ex-business partner, which I have a whole video on, so check that out. Now, before starting their own co-working space, Adam's background was a failed shoe startup and then a baby clothes startup called Crawlers with a K. So Crawlers invented baby pants with knee pads to protect the child's knees as the infant crawled on the floor. I know, we didn't even think that was a problem. The tagline was, just because they don't tell you doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And shockingly, that startup never caught on. But they met, Miguel and Adam, and before launching WeWork, they partnered on another single space in Brooklyn, a co-working spot called Green Desk. And its focus was on sustainability, co-working, recycled furniture, and in the future would be powered by wind power. And they did this for like a year. They ended up selling their interest in that business, and they had a non-compete in Brooklyn, which is why they started in Manhattan looking for a space to launch the first WeWork. Now, before they had a single location, they were really good at spinning a story, and when I say they, I mean Adam. Adam was really great at raising money. Before WeWork had even one location, they valued themselves at $45 million.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Adam's wife, who was a cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow, invested $1 million into her husband and his business as sort of the seed round. The way you do. The last profitable year that we know of in the history of WeWork was 2012, where it made $1.7 million in profit. Now, part of the business strategy for WeWork was shirking labor laws. So they wanted to keep their costs low. They wanted to run the construction around the clock, which means they didn't work with unions at all. Now, WeWork, and specifically Adam, was focused on growth at the expense of profitability, which is pretty, mainstream with Uber and Airbnb and all of those type of startups, that they're focused on profitability later. But unlike, tech startups, WeWork had, buildings, all these expenses. It's not like you can just add a couple lines of code or, add some more server space to get, a whole building of people. So they're valued as a tech company, but their expenses did not match those of a tech company. Now, here are some numbers on how they were valued from 2011 when they started to 2017 when things really started to go crazy. So in 2015, they were valued at $11.3 billion after raising $433 million. 2016, 17 billion, and then in 2017 valued at 20 billion after raising $760 million. And this made them the fourth most valuable startup in America after Uber, Airbnb, and SpaceX. And a member of their finance team mentioned in this book, quote, "The nature of private markets is that if 9 smart investors pass, it only takes one relatively dumber investor, and suddenly we're valued at 16 billion with a B." By 2017, Adam was no longer 50-50 with Miguel. They kind of switched that up. Early on, Miguel made a deal with Adam if he took a investment with Benchmark, which was their first really big investors, that once his shares were worth over 100 million, they would slowly transition over to Adam. So they started as 50-50, but that changed within a few years. And then by 2017, Adam had updated the company charter so that he had 10 votes for every share of the company that he owned. This gave him roughly 65% of the votes on any company matter. In 2018, they lost almost 2 billion with a B in 1 year. They claim to have a 90 million a year loss simply because of what they called desk slippage. And since they bought their desks from IKEA, you know that's a shitload of desks. Then it got even crazier. In 2019, the Japanese company SoftBank invested 10.65 billion into WeWork, giving it a private valuation of 47 billion. And that was when we realized we hit the top.
Harry, I've reached the top!
Now in 2019, after Adam sold 700 million of his stock pre-IPO, so they never ended up IPOing, but he offloaded a bunch of stock and then boosted his voting power from 10 votes per share to 20 votes per share because he still wanted to maintain control when all of the new investors came in. Now, this is double what peers in the industry typically have as founders when they have 10 votes per share, but 20 is particularly egregious to me considering how many shares he'd unloaded to personally enrich himself. Here's a thought: if you want to stay majority and in power and in control, keep yourself invested in the company. Don't sell your shares before IPO and then just try to change the rules of the game. Another crazy thing they had was this Game of Thrones style governance, which company filings stated that if he died, his wife Rebecca would have been in charge with appointing a successor. Like he's a king or something. King of WeWork. It's insane. Now, one part of this book that I had some personal experience with was their competitive nature when it came to other co-working spaces. Essentially, in the book, it reads like either you join us or we will destroy you. And I personally saw some of that firsthand. See, from 2013 to 2016, I was a member at a New York co-working space called Queen's Collective, run by entrepreneur Argentina Flores. And they had the best community of any co-working space I've ever experienced, including WeWork. I made great friends there, I started Best Self there, and I'm still friends with a lot of people that I started there with, even today. Now, when WeWork opened a location a block away from them in 2016, they began poaching Argentina's members with these crazy offers, like, you know, from the low end of 3 months free to a year of free rent. They would just keep upping it if you tried to say no. With WeWork's pockets being as deep as they were, with millions or billions of dollars, they didn't really care that they were losing money, they just wanted to acquire customers. In fact, I read that some savvy companies would take like the 6-month free and then jump from one WeWork space to the next without anyone internally keeping track. So they're getting all of this free rent and essentially WeWork is paying for it. Now, WeWork were growing insanely fast. As part of the investment from SoftBank, they were pressured to 10x all of their plans. But unlike tech, like I mentioned, where it's like a few lines of code or more server space, adding users isn't that expensive for real tech companies, but WeWork had a ton of hard costs and big expenses and buildings and all of this stuff. And then they start offering these commercial real estate brokers a shocking commission, 100% of the first year's rent paid by new tenants. So they're trying to grow fast, they're trying to lease as many buildings as they can, and so they do this crazy commission. Now, on some 2-year deals where WeWork was already giving a year away free to the tenant to move over to their co-working space, This meant that the company wasn't bringing in any revenue at all for the first 24 months. That's 2 years of you fronting the costs. And in some cases, they were in such a rush to close leases rather than do due diligence that they were signing up buildings, paying costs way above the next bidder, like hundreds of millions, and they didn't stop to think, is this profitable? Does this make sense? Now, on top of poaching tenants of existing co-working spaces, they also did things like they hired a steel drum band to play outside other co-working spaces to disrupt the tenants. And Adam was heard bragging to an investor that his efforts had slashed rivals' occupancy rate. He said, "I destroyed Office Group and I can obliterate any co-working space that I want." Queens Collective went out of business in 2017. She now runs Mixed Roots, so she's fine, she's an entrepreneur, but so many co-working spaces went under because of WeWork. And if WeWork had have just focused on the numbers, not spending money like crazy, and focusing on the core business, which was community co-working, which makes sense, they might have made it. Instead, they were in so many businesses that I didn't even know until I read this book. They were trying to do everything and anything. They were acquiring crazy companies like a Wave company and a Shazam for TV when you're in pubs so that you can know what movie's playing. Like, I don't even understand what that has to do with WeWork, but that is actually an app that they acquired. Adam's focus on personal enrichment was another huge takeaway in this book. So from secretly owning buildings that WeWork would lease out, which is a huge conflict because how do you negotiate with yourself? So he's collecting like a lot of money, millions or hundreds of millions in rent to himself from WeWork. And then there was also owning trademarks for WeWork personally or through his holding company that then he would license out to the company for like over $5 million per year. So Adam Newman personally enriching himself off the backs of employees who never got to cash out. So the company, they grew quickly, yet the benefits of the growth seemed to be accruing only to those at the top, the executives, not the ones actually doing the building. So they would tell people, oh, we're gonna give equity soon, but then the goalposts kept moving. Some employees did eventually get equity because there was no IPO, and Adam cashed out 700 million of stock before IPO, along with the VCs and some of the early investors. The employees who had actually built WeWork went from literally like meeting with financial advisors because they think they're gonna IPO in 2 weeks to being laid off and out of a job with really nothing to show for the years they put in, because another strategy at WeWork was they would hire cheap, they would pay them as little as they could with the promise that they will get equity eventually. And then, you do that for a couple of years and then your equity, you're never really able to cash out for the amount of time that you put in. Yeah, it's just, I didn't like it. The whole situation actually reminded me of Bad Blood, another great book about the fraud that was the medical device startup Theranos, led by Elizabeth Holmes, who, you might not know, was a cousin of Adam Newman. Just kidding, they're not related at all. But given their superhuman ability to fool a lot of people into giving them billions of dollars, you might have believed me for a second, because they're cut from the same cloth. Interesting to note is that Theranos had no doctors on its board of directors, much like WeWork had no one from real estate. So the people that would know the ins and outs aren't on their board of directors, and that is a pretty big red flag for me. Now, as of May 2020, Adam is gone from WeWork. Its valuation is $2.9 billion as of May, so with COVID, it's probably a lot less. Now, there's so much more to this book about, renting out Hollywood studios, giving equity to chain smokers, all of these internal culture crazy shit that I learned a lot from that I didn't mention because there's just so much in it. But again, grab this book because there's so much to the story that I just can't put in this video. So if you want a copy of this book, leave a comment below and give me a takeaway that you learned, something that maybe I didn't mention about WeWork, or your thoughts on the rise of startups driven by these cult of personalities like Theranos, WeWork, maybe Tesla. He's actually showing his work and actually doing stuff, so it's very different. But I'm curious your thoughts. Drop a comment below and get a chance to win this book.